In classic medieval fantasy, the knight hunts the dragon, but in today's build, the knight is going to be the dragon. This is going to be a warrior who has the blood and magic of dragons flowing through their veins, but also has a lot of martial prowess and ability. Welcome to the Knight of Flame and Scale. This is a Draconic Sorcerer Spellsword build for the 2024 rules, and my name is Nathan, and here on the channel I do builds for Dungeons & Dragons, as well as I cover character classes, subclasses, as well as some game mechanics and things for Dungeon Masters. So if that's the kind of content you enjoy, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any content. Now, let's go ahead and jump into this character build. So here is our agenda for this video. I'm going to introduce and talk about the build concept. Then we'll go through our progression from level 1 to level 17. And I've broken this down into sections to kind of make navigation easier. Although at each of our key thresholds, so that'll be level 6, level 9, level 13, and level 17, I'm going to give a damage report and kind of talk about the kind of numbers that this character can output, as well as what their tactics and some of the things they're going to be capable of are. And then we'll kind of summarize and talk about the build as a whole before we close. So, jumping into our introduction and build concept. So, this character concept is going to be for a spellsword that is somewhat inspired by the Dragon Knight hero from Dota. Now, this is going to be mostly a concept-driven build, so there are some requirements that I have for myself going into it. So the first of these is that I want to be a weapon and shield user. Now, the character in the game uses a longsword, but I'm willing to settle for pretty much any weapon with a shield, and additionally having weapon masteries would be really nice. It's important to note I don't actually play Dota or Dota 2 at all, although I really do enjoy watching it. I do have a little bit of history playing the game that I can talk about in another video if you're curious, but Dragon Knight is one of my favorite characters. I think that his art is awesome and he's a really cool guy overall. Anyway, our next requirement is we want to be durable and heavily armored. So the character in the game, obviously, you can see he's got a shield, he has armor, he has kind of a high healing factor and that kind of thing. Mechanically, what this just means, other than wanting to use a shield, is I want to use either medium or heavy armor on this character. The next thing, obviously, is we want to have dragon-esque abilities, so being able to breathe fire and that kind of thing, cause fear. So we're going to be mixed kind of melee and some spell casting in order to be able to achieve this. Additionally, this character eventually gains the ability to transform into a dragon, so this is something I would like to capture, being able to fly and that kind of thing. Now, the main requirement I have for this, beyond trying to capture this thematically, is I would eventually like to be able to cast the Draconic Transformation spell. This is a spell out of Fizzbands that lets you unleash like a force damage breath and gives you blind sight and flight and that kind of thing. It is a 7th level spell you can get out of Fizzbands' Treasury of Dragons, and it is available to druids, sorcerers, and wizards, although if you're a bard, you will have access to it through magical secrets. So ultimately, I would like to be able to access this spell by the end of the progression I track, which is to level 17. So with those requirements in place, let me just kind of tell you a little bit about what this character concept is going to generate in the end. So this character is going to be durable, versatile, and overall a pretty darn effective character. I'm not particularly building 4 damage per round or control. I'm kind of taking the concepts that fit the theme and seeing what kind of numbers I can produce, although I can say that this character is going to be overall very effective and capable of pumping out damage or control as needed. Now, the books that you will need for this character, you'll obviously need the 2024 Player's Handbook, and then for some spells, you will need Xanathar's, Tasha's, and Fizzbands' Treasury of Dragons. Now, if you don't have those books, that's fine. You won't fully be able to capture everything, but you should be able to get most of what this character wants. Obviously, Draconic Transformation is out of Fizzbands. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in particular has the Blade cantrips, which are very nice for this character. That's Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade. And Xanathar's has a really nice defensive spell in Absorb Elements. But again, if you don't have access to those, that's fine. But note that these are the books that I'm going to use to kind of select this character's spells from. All right, for our progression beginning at level 1, we are going to be starting with Paladin, and I'm going to go the heavy armor route here. I'm not going to go with medium armor, although that is a potential option. One of the cool things that Paladins have is they have Searing Smite, which is a really good spell, and I think stacking this on top of Green Flame Blade makes for a really evocative and powerful character image for me, so that's kind of what I want to start with. Now, as a paladin, we get wisdom and charisma saving throw proficiencies. We get a couple of paladin skills, and we get proficiency with pretty much all the weapons in the game, as well as all the armor and shields in the game. Obviously, the main class that I'm going to be using doesn't actually get these, and paladins also get weapon masteries, so this is something that's going to be really great here. Additionally, one of the cool things about Paladin under the 2024 rules is that, as with all the half-casters now, The number of levels you count toward your spellcasting progression is your level over 2 rounded up instead of rounded down, which means that a single level of Paladin is worth just as much toward our spell slots as something like a single level of Sorcerer or Wizard or Druid and that kind of thing. So it doesn't actually slow down our spell slot progression. Now the features that we get as a first level Paladin, we get 5 points of Lay on Hands. It's a bonus action now, which is nice. So we can use this bonus action to heal ourselves or someone else for any number of points out of this pool, or we can spend 5 points to heal a disease. This is nice, but not really something I expect us to be using very much. Then we get Paladin Spellcasting. We can always prepare 2 spells now, and we get 2 first level slots at this level as a first level caster. Now the ones I would prepare here at the beginning are just Bless and Divine Smite, but one of the nice things about Paladin Spellcasting is we can swap out one of these spells every long rest. Now eventually, as I said earlier, we're going to want Searing Smite. It's a really good spell now and scales very well with upcasting, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. The other one, Bless is obviously very good, but eventually I might want something like Wrathful Smite to cause the Frightened condition, and that could be something good that would be really nice to have in your back pocket. As for our weapon masteries, we get 2, and we can swap these out on a long rest as well. So depending on what weapons you get from your DM, feel free to swap your weapons over to them, but we're mainly looking for one-handed D8 weapons that we can use with a shield. Now the ones I'm going to pick, not knowing what we're going to get, are the longsword, which has sap, which gives enemy a disadvantage on their next attack against us, or the next attack in general, and then the warhammer for push, which lets us push creatures if they're large or smaller up to 10 feet on hit. Now the warhammer is probably going to end up being our optimal kind of weapon choice due to the way the rules work. I'll talk about this more a little bit in a bit. But the longsword is great defensively and does match the aesthetic of the character overall. And the longsword is also, obviously there are a lot of good magic longswords that exist in the game. So even though the mastery isn't necessarily the best offensively, it has some intangible benefits that are pretty helpful. As for our starting equipment, Paladins get 150 gold from their class plus 50 gold from their background. Let's get some chainmail, our 2 weapons that we have mastery with, so the longsword and the warhammer, and then a shield with a holy symbol on it. You can add that for 5 additional gold. And then let's start with a component pouch or an arcane focus for 25 gold. Now this totals less than the 150. Eventually we won't actually need to have an arcane focus and that kind of thing, but it's nice to have for now. Because we're going to be doing a bit of multi-classing. But first, let's talk about our background and our species. So the background that we want to use is going to be custom. Per the Dungeon Master's Guide, you can kind of make a custom background. So the 3 scores I would pick are Strength, Constitution, and Charisma for the ones you could potentially increase. The feat I want is Tough to boost our hit points by 2 per level. And then for your skills, it doesn't really matter. And for your tool proficiency, it doesn't really matter. Although if your DM allows crafting, you might want proficiency in Arcana and Smith's tools to potentially craft weapons and armor. With the species I'm going to be using, Merchant is also a potential practical option, as Merchant gives the Lucky Origin feat, and that is what I'm going to get from my species. Spoiler. As for our ability scores themselves, we are using the point buy method as always, and I'm going to get 15s in Strength, Constitution, and Charisma. We're going to put a +1 into our Constitution and a +2 into our Charisma. Now, that said, you could drop your strength to 14 and get a 10 wisdom instead of an 8 if you want to. Now, the main reason I have our strength at 15 is this is a character who is going to be wanting to use plate armor, which has a prerequisite of 15 strength to avoid the 10-foot movement speed penalty. Now, later on, we are going to get a single feat to boost our strength. But that said, I don't know if we're going to get plate armor before then in our campaign, so I would like to have this before I get that feat, which isn't going to be until potentially level 10 or later. So you basically have a choice to either eat the penalty or just meet the requirement from the start. And if you are going to be starting at a higher level, like say level 10 plus, you can just boost your strength to 15 with the feat, and then you can have a little bit better wisdom saving throw, although we do have proficiency there. Now, thanks to having tough as well as a 16 Constitution, our starting hit points is going to be 15, which is pretty darn good, especially that's equivalent to a barbarian with a 16 Constitution, which isn't really that bad. Now, as for our race, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we are going to be getting the lucky feat, so I'm going to be taking human out of the player's handbook. Now, that said, you could use pretty much any race you want. Dragonborn is really appropriate and with the ability to breathe fire and all, although, again, I'm kind of basing this concept as a human who has the blood of dragons running through his veins, so I thought human would be quite appropriate. But again, anything can work that fits kind of your themes and the vision you have for your character. I could see Goliath or Elf working very well, or pretty much anything that you want, honestly. The extra origin feat that I'm getting out of human will help protect our saving throws, which will be something that will be really nice. So as a human, we are a humanoid and we can be medium or small size. I'm going to pick, I want to be medium, obviously. We have a 30-foot speed, and then we have the resourceful feature. This gives us heroic inspiration every time we finish a long rest. So this lets us potentially re-rolls a d20 roll. We also get an extra skill proficiency as well as an extra origin feat, and I'm going to take Lucky. What Lucky does is we can give ourselves advantage on any d20 test before rolling, and we can do this number of times per long rest equal to our proficiency bonus. One of the nice things is this works on initiative rolls too, so I'm probably going to be using this on important saves and maybe initiative. That said, you absolutely could take Alert on this character instead of Lucky, although I would like to think that someone else in the party is going to be taking Alert and could potentially swap with you if you needed to go first to land a control ability and that kind of thing. So that's just a way you can kind of have a little bit of inter-party synergy. As for RP, I kind of imagine this character as a champion of Bahamut, who's going to be imbued with kind of draconic powers, and I'm going to be flavoring our multi-classing as such. I basically imagine the story of this character is at some point early in our career, we're going to be chosen by a dragon or a dragon god or that kind of thing to receive more powerful abilities, and then we'll kind of flavor our story going from there. All right, so moving on to level 2, we are going to be a Warlock 1. So we're going to do a quick little multi-class here to pick up Pact of the Blade and a few other goodies. What this allows us to do is Pact of the Blade lets us use our weapon as a casting focus, and we can also change our base damage type away from slashing into radiant or something else if we want, and also enables us to make our attack rolls and damage rolls with this weapon using our charisma instead of our strength or dexterity. So this will allow us to become single attribute dependent, which is going to be really good. From an RP perspective, to kind of justify this Warlock dip, I imagine this as Bahamut or the dragon we serve or embody, triggering the kind of first manifestations of our dragon powers. So, as a first level Warlock, what do we get? So first we get our Eldritch Invocations. We get 1, so we're going to get Pact of the Blade to allow our attacks with Charisma, and we can use our Warhammer or Longsword as our spellcasting focus. We also get Magic here, which is the Warlock spellcasting. We get 2 cantrips. I'm going to get Minor Illusion and Blade Ward. Blade Ward is really nice. It subtracts a d4 from attacks against you, so it's kind of like plus 2 AC, and it's a cantrip that uses concentration. So for now, we'll probably use that. As for the spells that we get out of, we also might want to use Bless. Also, Bless is really good. As for the spells that we're going to prepare out of Warlock, we want Armor of Agathis for the temporary hit points, as well as the damage reflection. This will make us extra durable, and then you can honestly pick whatever you want for your second one. I would probably take Unseen Servant. It's a ritual spell, which means you can cast it for free. Everyone can do ritual casting now, so maybe we have like an invisible dragon servant. That could be something that would be really nice. All right, moving on to level yeah, I'm just adjusting the spellcasting thing there so you kind of see the format we'll see for the rest of the video. All right, moving on, level 3, we're going to multi-class again, finally do our main class, which is going to be Sorcerer. So as a first level Sorcerer, we get 4 cantrips. Now the ones you want to make sure that you pick up are Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade. These are the blade trips that kind of form the core of our kind of rotation, and thanks to Pact of the Blade, we can make our attack rolls and damage rolls with these using our charisma instead of our strength or dexterity. The other ones I'm going to pick up are Firebolt and Acid Splash, more so for range and potential draconic flavor more than anything else. As for the spells that we get at this level, we get 2. I'm going to take Shield and Witch Bolt. Now, unfortunately, we can't cast Shield with our hands full just yet, so we probably aren't going to use it. So either two-hand your versatile weapon or just resist using the shield spell for now, because we can't provide this spell naturally requires a free hand because it has the somatic component but lacks the material component. We also get innate sorcery, and this is one of the big things that I'm kind of building this character around. We can use this twice per long rest, takes a bonus action to activate, and what this does is it gives us advantage on attack rolls with sorcerer spells we cast, as well as +1 to our save DC, and it lasts for a minute. This includes attacks we make with Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade, which are going to be our kind of go-to cantrips. Now, the other option you could do for your main class is Bard. I will talk about this a little bit more in the summary, but I personally like the way that Sorcerer works for this concept a lot better. Now, one quick thing I want to talk about here is Green Flame Blade. So what this cantrip does is when you hit the enemy with the weapon that you use as part of casting the cantrip, it also causes some flame to jump onto an adjacent enemy that's within 5 feet of the target. Now, here's the thing. One of the cool things is we also have another effect that applies when we hit a target if we're using the Warhammer in the push mastery that lets us push a target up to 10 feet. Now, one of the cool things is the way the game rules work with things that happen at the same time. It's called the simultaneous effects rules. If multiple effects happen at the same time, in this case, the push as well as the secondary damage from green flame blade, we, the player, or whoever's the active character, can choose which order those effects trigger in. So if when you hit them initially and there's no enemy within 5 feet to jump the flames onto, you could push them before you do the flame jump and potentially be able to get that area of effect damage more reliably. And this is the reason why I was kind of saying that the Warhammer is probably going to be the more optimal weapon to use, although the longsword again fits the thematics. Additionally, the force movement from the Warhammer could also be useful with some of the concentration spells and kind of area effect things that we'll get later down the line. I didn't assume that you were using either of these weapons when I'm doing damage calculations, but if I was playing this character, I would probably go with the Warhammer, even though it doesn't quite fit the whole flaming sword aesthetic I was talking about, just because of the mechanical advantage. It is quite good when you can layer the effects and have them triggered in the order that you want. All right, moving on to level 4, we are going to be a second level sorcerer, and we get Font of Magic. So we have 2 sorcery points, and we can convert spell slots into sorcery points at a 1-to-1 rate, and then we can convert sorcery points back into spell slots, although they have a higher cost. We also get meta magic here, so we get 2 options we can spend sorcery points on. I'm going to take Quicken Spell. This lets us cast a spell as a bonus action, which is going to be nice potentially to, we can essentially double Green Flame Blade at this level if we want, which is pretty cool. And then one of the other things I'm going to take is Transmute Spell. So since I'm going to be picking a lot of fire spells on this character, obviously there are a decent number of enemies in the game that are resistant or immune to fire damage, so having a way to damage those enemies with our core spells is going to be important. We also get a couple more first level spells at this level. I'm going to take Absorb Elements and Burning Hands for kind of our first AoE blasting option. Now, importantly, we can't cast Absorb Elements just yet because it has the same kind of hands full problem that Shield does, but again, we will fix this later. And we are now a 3rd level caster because Paladin counts as a full level, so we have some 2nd level spell slots. Moving on to level 5, we are a Sorcerer level 3, and we get our subclass, which is probably pretty obviously Draconic Sorcery. So this gives us a couple features. The first one is Draconic Resilience. This gives us an AC while we're not wearing armor equal to our Constitution modifier plus our Dexterity modifier plus 10. Now, I'm not going to be using this on this character. Obviously, we're going to be using plate armor, but this also gives us plus 1 HP per sorcerer level, which gets our health to a very nice 55. One of the things that you'll notice on this character is is very, very beefy compared to a lot of other characters I've made, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the summary. But yeah, this character has a lot of health. Now, one of the cool things here is we also get the Draconic Sorcerer subclass spell list. And one of the great things about this is we get these spells for free now, and the Sorcerer also gets more spells per level. So we get Chromatic Orb, Command, Dragon's Breath, and Suggestion all prepared for free. These are all pretty great. I love Command for the concentration free control, and Dragon's Breath can be an okay kind of at-will AoE blasting thing for when we need a lot of AoE. A Suggestion is a potentially good control spell. Since we're a 5th level character, our cantrip damage does go up, and we get to learn a couple 2nd level spells. I'm going to take Misty Step and Hold Person. And I kind of see this as the power that was seeded in us by Bahamut sprouts and begins to bear fruit. We got plus 6 prepared spells at this level. We have ability to teleport and ability to potentially lock down an enemy now. So we've got some solid options as we're gaining spells here. Moving on to level 6, we're going to be a Sorcerer 4, and we get our first ability score increase or feat, and I'm going to take Warcaster to bump our Charisma to 18. Now, pretty much all of the features of this are very useful for this character. So the first one is we have advantage on concentration checks to maintain concentration on spells. Great. Then we get Reactive Spell. We can replace opportunity attacks with spells, so long as they only target the creature that we're going after. Great, because now we can opportunity attack with Booming Blade or Green flame blade and that kind of thing. And then one of the other things that's really nice on this character is the somatic components bullet. What this does is it allows us to provide somatic components for spells even when our hands are full. So now, even though we have our sword or warhammer in one hand and our shield in the other, we can still cast shield and absorb elements finally. So that's going to be very nice, and we should have a very good defense from here on out. We get another cantrip here as our Sorcerer 4. Pick whatever you want. I would probably take Ray of Frost for that ranged slow option. And we get another second level spell. I would probably learn Mirror Image to boost my own resilience. This is a spell that got buffed under the 2024 rules. So now you potentially only have to roll to see if you lose a Mirror Image if they actually hit your character's armor class. And our character's armor class at this level, assuming we didn't have plate, would be a minimum of 18 up to 23 if we cast shield. If we had plate armor, we would have 20 AC resting and 25 with a shield spell, potentially even higher if we were using our concentration on something like Blade Ward. Again, feel free to take other spells if you want. Another option is Tasha's Mind Whip, although I will be investing in the Psychic spell kind of suite later. It is something I really like, but I don't think it's super thematic necessarily to have on this character. But again, pick the spells that you want that fit your character. Other than Searing Smite, we don't really have anything that is absolutely necessary for our damage output at this point. All right, at level 6, it is time for our first damage report. Now, I will say, calculating damage for this build was a bit tricky, but I did eventually find a couple specific methods to help with it. So this character I'm going to be grading as a damage per round character. I'm going to be calculating what I call a peak damage per round, as well as a max output damage per round, and then a daily average damage per round. So for the peak damage per round, this is kind of the same as I've done these in the past, where I allow a single setup round. I assume I have all resources available, but everything I do in all the rounds after the setup round has to be the same. So I basically need 3 rounds where I'm doing the same thing every time, and I'm calling that a consistent peak sustained damage per round. However, for the other 2, for our max output and daily average, I'm going to spread out all the resources our character has over a potential 4 combat adventuring day with a short rest in the middle, and the max output encounter in this case is going to be the encounter that has the most resources, which is going to be the first one of the day. So that's just kind of how I'm going to be doing the damage on this character, and the whole 4-round thing and max output is something I have been following with all of my 2024 builds. All right. So, as for our peak damage per round tactics, in the first round we're going to cast Bless and activate innate sorcery, and then in round 2 and beyond we're going to use Green Flame Blade with a Searing Smite. Now, one of the things, again, is this encounter is not one I'm going to be using for the other calculations. I'm not actually sure how much this number is actually going to be useful. I am going to be only showing single target damage, although I know there's a cleave in there out of Green Flame Blade, which did get an upgrade back at character level 5. And I'm also going to assume kind of a worst case on Searing Smite in that our targets are going to pass their saving throw against it. And I'm going to carry this assumption forward, so your actual damage may indeed be quite higher. Now, if your target fails to save so that Searing Smite is going to keep going, you may just want to quicken a Blade cantrip with your bonus action instead of just doing another Searing Smite. Now, the damage that a single Green Flame Blade does with innate sorcery, we're going to have a +7 with a d4 to hit with advantage thanks to innate sorcery. We're going to do 2d8, 1 from our weapon and 1 from Green Flame Blade, plus 2d6 from Searing Smite, plus 4 from our charisma, and then another 2d6 guaranteed at the start of the target's turn. So one of the cool things about Searing Smite is that it basically has 2d6 per spell level scaling, because they take the damage on hit and they take it again at the beginning of their turn guaranteed, and then they get a save. If they fail that save, they'll take the damage again at the start of their next turn. So again, I'm assuming that they always pass that save, which I understand in a real game they probably will fail that save sometimes, especially given that we have a pretty darn high spell save DC. Now, against an enemy with an armor class of 10, we would do an average of 28.5 damage per round for rounds 2 to 4 with these tactics, and against an armor class of 15, it would be 27.2. Now, this is pretty mediocre as far as dedicated damage per round builds I've done up to this point, but again, this is a weapon and shield build that has a pretty darn chonky amount of HP at this level at 65. And we also made some kind of worst case assumptions that do lower this damage output a little bit. All right. Now, in order to understand how the max output and daily averages work, I got to show you how I'm allocating spell slots. So again, max output is going to be the one where we have the most resources, and I'm planning for 2 encounters, a short rest, and then 2 more encounters. All right, so we're going to have a total of 6 first level spell slots, 4 out of our core spell slot progression, and 2 out of Warlock, because we get 1 back on our short rest, and then we've got our 2 3s and our 3 2s. So our first encounter, we have a 3-2-1, and then a 3-1-1, 2-1-1, 2-1. Now I'm going to assume that we're going to use 1 first level slot each encounter for the shield spell, so I'm going to take that away. I'm going to be using my innate sorcery on the encounters we have the most resources, so in this case it's going to be encounters 1 and 2, and we have 4 total sorcery points. I'm going to be using those in encounters 1 and 2 to quicken spell, as that's going to be when they're most efficient, because that's when we have innate sorcery active. So here's what I'm going to be using our spell slots for. So in encounters 1 and 2, I'm going to be using our spell slots for Searing Smite, and then I'm going to be quickening a green Flame Blade in round 4. In our other 2 in encounter 3, I'm going to be using 1 Searing Smite at level 2, and then a Witch Bolt at level 1. And then in encounter 4, I'm just going to be using a Witch Bolt because it gives me a bonus action that I wouldn't otherwise have. All right, so can't comment on the phone right now. All right, so as for our max output damage per round, this is, again, our average damage per round over that 4-round encounter where we have the most resources. Against an enemy with an armor class of 10, it's going to be 26.3, and against an enemy with an armor class of 15, it's going to be 23.5. Now, our damage per round is pretty good for the first 2 encounters when we have innate sorcery, and that said, it drops by about 33% when that's not available, which is going to be, 3 and 4. So our daily average at this point against an armor class of 10 is 22.1 with these tactics, and against an armor class of 15, it is 18.9. And again, these numbers are pretty low, and honestly, in a real game, this character would probably be going for control or AoE blasting instead. If you're thinking about that realistically, our AoE damage is actually pretty good with Dragon's Breath, as well as potentially green Flame Blade. We also have the potential combo of Booming Blade using the Warhammer with the Push Mastery, so that's something that can be very effective. All right, so here's all those numbers just kind of collated here in one thing. And one of the things I did on this character is I did make my max output encounter weaker than our theoretical kind of peak DPR to more efficiently deal damage over the course of a longer adventuring day. And again, obviously your tactics are going to vary table to table and session to session, but I hope overall this method can give a decent snapshot of how this character can perform in a variety of situations, and we should be able to go through the future damage reports a little quicker since we're going to be using these same assumptions. All right, moving on to level 7, we are going to be a Sorcerer 5, and this gives us Sorceress Restoration. What this does is once per long rest, during a short rest, we can recover half of our maximum sorcery points rounded down. So this is going to boost our sorcery points quite a bit. We also get our subclass spells here in Fear and Fly, great control in Fear, great utility in Fly, and a potential first aspect of our kind of draconic transformation. Getting 3rd level spells here is great. The ones I would learn, we get to learn 2 more. I'm going to take Counterspell and Slow, and then do a retrain to get rid of Burning Hands and replace it with a better spell in Fireball. Again, feel free to pick other spells if you want. We are a 6th level caster at this point with a chonky 75 hit points. Moving on to level 8, we are a Sorcerer 6, and we get our next subclass feature, which is going to be Elemental Affinity. We get to pick a damage type out of the kind of core, kind of chromatic elemental damage type lists. I'm going to pick Fire, obviously. This gives us resistance to fire damage, and then when we cast a spell that deals fire damage, we can add our Charisma modifier to 1 damage roll of that spell. So one of the cool things here is that this works with Green Flame Blade because it deals fire damage as well as Searing Smite. So if we do a Searing Smite enhanced Green Flame Blade, we could potentially get to add our Charisma modifier 3 times to damage. Twice out of our cantrip because it deals fire damage and uses it anyway, and then once out of Searing Smite because it deals fire damage. So this is going to be a pretty nice boost to our damage output, as well as if we're just firing off blasting spells. Importantly, this doesn't work for concentration spells that have a recast component like Dragon's Breath. It might work on the initial one, like when you cast it, but it has to actually deal damage when you cast it and not just give you a buff that lets you deal damage. So it can be hard to use in that sense, but since we're mainly going to be using Green Flame Blade and Searing Smite, it actually helps quite a bit with our damage. Then we also get another 3rd level spell here. I would love to take a Chardalon Stride out of Fizbands. This boosts our speed by 20 feet, makes it so we don't provoke opportunity attacks, and basically lets us burn enemies as we run by them. Could be a pretty cool and thematic spell to have on this character, and it could be a great area effect option. That said, this one doesn't work with Elemental Affinity because it doesn't, doesn't deal damage immediately when you cast it. But again, Elemental Affinity is mainly for our other stuff. We're a 7th level caster at this point, so that means we get a 4th level slot. At level 9, we are going to be a Sorcerer 7, and we get Sorcery Incarnate. Now, this is a wonderful big deal feature. So what this does is we can restore our use of innate sorcery with 2 sorcery points, no action required. And then additionally, while innate sorcery is active, we can use 2 meta magic options per spellcast. Normally, you can only do 1. The second part, I'm not really planning on using on any of our damage, but once we get to Sorcerer 10, a little bit later on, this has some really great implications for control. Now, one of the big things here is that, encounters 3 and 4, when we didn't have innate sorcery, were kind of bummers. But now that we can potentially have it every encounter, we should absolutely use it every time that we can. We also get some nice subclass spells here in Arcane Eye and Charm Monster. Arcane Eye in particular is wonderful for scouting, and Charm Monster is a situationally useful spell. As for the spells that we're going to learn here, I would personally learn Banishment. It is a very powerful control spell, and Upcast to target an additional creature, which is actually really good for Sorcerer, again, once we get our next set of meta magic, although again, you can kind of pick whatever you want. I would also retrain Witch Bolt here for a spell like Wall of Fire, which could work really well with our Warhammer Push Mastery. I think it's out. This spell is outlived its usefulness at this point, and so I would retrain it for something you want. Potentially start shifting into the Psychic Spell Suite if that's something that you want, although I will be doing that in the next future levels. All right, so level 9, it is time for our next damage report. So let's kind of talk about what we've gained since last time. Well, we've gained Sorcerer's Restoration, so we now have a base sorcery points of 10, 7 out of our level, and then we'll get an additional 3 out of this. We've gained 3rd and 4th level spells, as well as 4th level spell slots. We've gained Elemental Affinity for that extra charisma modifier to damage on Searing Smite and Green Flame Blade. And then, of course, we've gained Sorcery Incarnate, so we can potentially have innate sorcery every encounter, so long as we're willing to spend some sorcery points for it. In terms of our peak damage per round tactics, we're going to use 6 sorcery points before combat to make a 3rd, 4th level spell slot. In the first round, we're going to activate innate sorcery and cast slow on the enemies. Now, I'm going to assume our target has failed their saving throw against slow, so they have a -2 penalty to their AC. And then in rounds 2 through 4, we're going to Searing Smite at level 4 that enemy when we hit them with our Green Flame Blade. So Font of Magic basically enables us to cheese out this extra spell slot. And again, only do this if you know you want maximum damage output and there's only 1 combat. And again, we're assuming targets pass their save against Searing Smite. And at this point, I would probably be preparing another Smite, either Divine or Wrathful from Paladin, along with Searing Smite. All right, our damage here, we have +8 to hit with advantage with our green, with our cantrip. It's going to be doing 2d8 plus 4d6 plus 12 damage on the initial hit, and then 46 at the start of the target's turn. And our charisma gets added to both Searing Smite and Green Flame Blade an additional time, thanks to the Elemental Affinity feature we picked up at Sorcerer 6. So against an enemy with armor class of 10, we would do 51.2 damage per round once we've have our setup done. And against an enemy with armor class of 16, it's going to be 48.3, and this is an increase of nearly 80% since character level 6. All right, so just a quick talk about how we're going to allocate our spells and spell slots here for the rest of our damage calculations. You can see it here on the screen. Now, the spell slots that I've bracketed are ones that we're going to be converting into sorcery points. So in pretty much all of our encounters, we're going to be using all our high level slots to Searing Smite with, and then we'll use a quickened cantrip once we're out of spell slots that would cast Searing Smite above level 1. So the total sorcery point cost we have here is 12. We have 4 quickens and 2 innates. That's 12. We have 10 base, and we're going to convert 2 of our first level slots into sorcery points. So that's how we pay for everything. So our max output damage per round. So this is in that first encounter where we have the 4, 3, and the 2 1s. We're up to 37.1 damage per round against an armor class of 10 and 33 against an armor class of 16. And this is a bump of 40%, which is pretty good, relatively speaking. More sorcery points and better spell slots have helped, although we don't really have a reliable concentration spell to deal damage per round yet. Wall of Fire with the push combo from Warhammer could help, and it is a solid option, although it's not really reliable enough for me to calculate and consider it something that we want to do all the time. As for our daily average on this counter and setup, we're going to be doing 34.8 against an armor class of 10 and 31 against an armor class of 16. And again, this is about a 60% increase on our daily average, which is great. Although overall, we are still a bit on the low side compared to other builds I've made. Things are going to get better soon, although it's honestly, again, not that bad. Again, we're a weapon and shield build, and we're pretty durable. So I'm not really, stunned that our damage per round isn't stellar, given that we've invested a fair amount of our character building resources into defense. And again, here's just our collated damage numbers of everything we had at this level. All right, moving on to level 10, we are going to be a Sorcerer 8, which means we get our next ability score increase or feat. I'm going to take +2 Charisma and bump it to 20 and cap it. Although that said, you could potentially take your defensive feat now. The one I'm going to be wanting is Mage Slayer to boost my mental saves, although you might consider something like Heavy Armor Master. I'm personally going to go with the +2 Charisma here because it's going to give us better damage and better spell save DC, and I think our origin feat in Lucky is going to be enough, along with our inspiration, to help us potentially pass saves. Although you could take Mage Slayer if you want to sacrifice a little bit of damage. And again, Heavy Armor Master is also an option if you're not really concerned about your mental saves. As for our spells here, I'm going to get Ralathim Psychic Lance out of Fizban Treasury of Dragons. I'm going to start transitioning into a Psychic spell package here for the kind of upcoming group of levels, but again, kind of pick what you want. Dimension Door is a potential good option if you want to replace or enhance your teleport abilities, for example. At level 11, we are going to be a Sorcerer 9, and we get our final set of subclass spells. We get Legend Lore, and importantly, Summon Dragon. Summon Dragon is a massive damage spike for us. This is our first kind of real, reliable damage per round spell. We'll see just how much of a spike this is in the next damage report. The damage of our cantrips also goes up here. We get 2 more Sorcerer spells here. I'm going to get Hold Monster and Synaptic Static. Again, kind of transferring into a Psychic spell package here. You can pick what you want, but Hold Monster is really good, and the Psychic spell package is also pretty darn sweet. At this point, I would also be retraining Hold Person into another Psychic spell in Tasha's Mind Whip. I don't think you'll be facing too many humanoids at these higher levels, but if you do, Hold Monster works on them too. All right, moving on to level 12, we are going to be a Sorcerer 10, which means we get 2 more meta magic options. Pick what you want, but I'm going to go with Twin Spell, which enables us to essentially upcast spells that can target an additional creature just by spending a sorcery point instead of a higher level spell slot. This will enable you to efficiently upcast things like Hold Monster, Tasha's Mind Whip, or Banishment, and that kind of thing. Very powerful. We can also take Heightened Spell, which for 2 sorcery points, we can give our target disadvantage on their saving throw against a spell. Really important if you want to land something like Hold Monster on a key enemy. We also get another spell of our choice. At this level, honestly, you can pick whatever you want. I think something like Major Image could be cool for some out-of-combat utility. You can make permanent illusions and that kind of thing if you upcast this spell. We also get our first 6th level spell slot here as we are an 11th level caster. But between our meta magic and kind of the spells that we've picked, we've actually gained a large amount of control ability in these levels here. Now, at level 13, I'm going to take a 2nd level in Warlock. And what you might be thinking, why are you taking another level in Warlock when 6th level spells are right around the corner? I'll explain real quick. So first, we get a couple more invocations. I'm going to take Other Worldly Leap, which lets us cast the jump spell at will to enhance our mobility, as well as Pact of the Chain, which will let us get an enhanced familiar. One of the cool things about the Warlock invocations now is all the Pact ones, they're invocations, so you can take more than one. We also get Magical Cunning, which will give us back another Warlock slot once per long rest, and our number of our Warlock slots goes up to 2, so we now get we have 2 first level spells that come back on a short rest. You get another spell here as well. I would just take Detect Magic as a ritual for some utility. pick whatever you want. As for why we're taking the Warlock level here. So the extra spell slots will help fuel our defenses and kind of our sorcery point engine. We also get a lot of mobility and a lot of utility and supportability out of our familiar. At this point, I would consider using maybe the Sphinx of Wonder to potentially boost your saving throws. This is also a level you could take a lot earlier if you wanted. I kind of wanted to take it at level 9 or so, but that would delay having Sorcery Incarnate, which is a really big deal, so I didn't really want to do that. You don't actually have to take this, but one of the reasons I wanted to take this is we need another level. We need another level outside of Sorcerer to be able to set up Sorcerer 16 to be at character level 19, so we get an epic boon. If you don't want an epic boon, or don't know if you're going to 20, feel free to skip this. Although I think the utility it provides will be something I would very much like to have on my character. So I'm going to include it here. Feel free to take Sorcerer 11 instead if you want. All right, level 13, it is time for our next damage report. So what have we gained since last time? Well, we've capped our charisma. We've gained 5th level spells, namely Summon Dragon, as well as a 6th level slot. We've gained Twin and Heighten spell to enhance our control abilities. We've gained more Pact Magic, more mobility through our other Worldly Leap, and more utility out of our familiar. And we've also gained the whole kind of psychic spell package. So we've got Tasha's Mind Whip, Raltham Psychic Lance, and Synaptic Static for some great concentration-free control when needed. All right, as for our peak damage per round tactics, before combat starts, we're going to use 7 sorcery points out of our potential 10 to make an extra 5th level slot. And then in round 1, we're going to activate Innate Sorcery and cast Summon Dragon at level 6. So it's going to get 3 attacks, which is going to be really nice. And then round 2 and beyond, we're going to cast green. We're going to use our green Flame Blade cantrip and apply a 5th level Searing Smite. The damage here, we have plus 10 to hit with advantage thanks to Innate Sorcery. And we're going to be doing 3d8 plus 5d6 plus 15 damage on the initial hit and 5d6 at the start of our target's turn. And our Summon Dragon is going to have 3 rend attacks, each with plus 10 to hit, doing 1d6 plus 10 damage. And then they'll also have a DC 19 dexterity saving throw or 2d6 damage, breath, weapon, attack. Now, the damage that this is going to do against an armor class of 10 is going to be 112.1 damage per round. Against the higher armor class of 17 that we'd expect to face, we can do 95 damage per round. And we've more than doubled our peak damage output since our last check at level 9, and Summon Dragon alone has almost doubled our damage. All right, as for doing our max output encounter as well as our daily average, these are how I'm allocating our spell slots. One of the things here is we need to make an extra 5th level spell slot to be able to summon a dragon for our 4th encounter. So here's how I've allocated my sorcery points. So we are going to be doing Quicken 6 times and Innate twice for a total of 16. We have a single 5th level slot we're making for a total of 7. That's total sorcery point cost of 16. 16 plus 7 is 23. We have 15 base sorcery points, 10 out of our level, 5 from our recovery ability. So we need 8 more. So I'm going to be converting all our second levels and 2 of our first levels into sorcery points. This leaves us 3 levels of slots that we don't have to make into sorcery points. So that could be a second and a first or 3 firsts. And again, we are allocating 1 spell slot each encounter towards casting Shield. And you can see the spells that we're using in parentheses there for all these encounters. So our max output damage per round when we have Summon Dragon at level 6 and 2 Searing Smites, it's going to be 85.8 against an armor class of 10 and 70.9 against an armor class of 17. We've more than doubled our max damage output here. One of the other things to note here is that with all the increases and scaling that we've gotten, it's not worth doing Searing Smite at anything below spell level 3 over just quickening out another green flame blade. So that's why all of our second level slots are just going into sorcery points instead, because it's better to just quicken out another cantrip. As for our daily average on these tactics, we do 74 damage per round against our AC of 10 and 62 against the AC of 17. And again, we've almost doubled our daily average, and our Summon Dragon and continued green flame blade scaling are doing a lot of work here. Here's our collated numbers here, and honestly, compared to the other builds I've made to this point, our damage numbers are looking a lot more competitive now, although it is a bit of a shame it took until at least level 11 when we got Summon Dragon to get there. This is actually currently the best max output of all of my 24 builds at this level, other than the Fiend Knight build. That build is very good and it's a dedicated damage dealer. And we're right in the middle of my other caster builds, so the Draconic Trickster and the Maelstrom Walker in terms of our daily average, at least again at this point. At level 14, we're going to be a Sorcerer 11. That means we get 6th level spells and nothing else. I would probably take Mass Suggestion for my 6th level spell, but Chain Lightning with Transmute into Fire is pretty cool. To Disintegrate is also a lot of single target damage, so pick whatever you want here. At level 15, we're going to be a Sorcerer 12. We're going to get that next ability score increase to our feet. Now I'm going to go ahead and take Mage Slayer to fortify our mental saves. So we get Concentration Breaker. This gives enemies disadvantage on their concentration saves when we damage them, which is nice. But the main thing we want here is Guarded Mind. This allows us to just choose to pass an Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma saving throw if we failed, and we can do this once per short or long rest. You could also do Heavy Armor Master, but I think I really want the save protection here. And we are now a 13th level caster overall, which means our 7th level spell slot. At level 16, we are a Sorcerer 13, which means we can finally take our 7th level spell in Draconic Transformation. This spell takes a bonus action to cast and a bonus action to reactivate the breath weapon it gives you, which does 68 force damage. It also gives you a fly speed of 60 and blind sight 30. This is a really cool spell, very thematic, very on point. I would probably be using this for encounters where I had to deal with a lot of enemies and needed the AoE. That said, we're not going to be seeing it in the damage reports because it's not as good as Summon Dragon for kind of sustained single target damage, but it is a really good option to have. Finally, at level 17, we are going to be a Sorcerer 14, and we get our semi-capstone out of Draconic Sorcerer, which gives us Draconic Flight. So as a bonus action, we can get a 60-foot fly speed for an hour, and we can do this once per long rest, or cast 3 sorcery, or use 3 sorcery points to reactivate it, and the damage of our cantrips also goes up. So we can have flight, pretty much all the time if we want it and are willing to spend the sorcery points on it. And we are a 15th level caster here, so we have that 8th level spell slot. All right, here at level 17, it is time for our final damage report. So what has changed since last time? Well, it's mainly just the 6th and 7th level spells we've gotten, as well as the 7th and 8th level spell slots and the cantrip scaling. We've gotten Mage Slayer for defense and Draconic Flight for some utility, and we've also gotten a boatload more sorcery points. In terms of our peak damage per round, we're again going to make that extra 5th level slot, summon a dragon at the highest level that we can, and then Searing Smite on Green Flameblade. And again, remember, this is only if we don't have other encounters. And remember, the control on this character is probably what we're going to be doing, and it's been really good since character level 12. Here are our numbers for Green Flameblade and the Summon Dragon. I don't think we need to go through these in detail. Against an enemy with an armor class of 10, we're up to 137.7 damage per round, and against an enemy with an armor class of 18, it's going to be 114.7. This is a bump of 20 to 25%, mainly due to spell slot scaling. Here's how we're going to be allocating our resources for all of our encounters. At this point, it's not worth using Searing Smite over just double cantrips on anything that is a 3rd level spell or less. So we're only going to be smiting with 4th level or above spell slots, which is going to be the one that we're not using for our Summon Dragon. So potentially, also here at this point, I don't have to make any extra spell slots with sorcery points. So we're just, the things I can see, we've got 8 quickens and 2 innate sorceries for a total of 20 sorcery points. We have 21 available from being a 14th level sorcerer. So at this point, I don't need to convert any spell slots, although, if you wanted to do some enhanced control and that kind of thing, you might need to make more slots or, twin or quicken things as you need to. And we have plenty of slots, pretty much everything from 3rd level and lower to convert or use other spells with. Our max output damage per round here, when we have that 8th level slot available, is going to be 113.9 against the armor class of 10 and 92.9 against the armor class of 18. 30% increase, again, mainly due to the 8th level Summon Dragon. Our daily average is up to 94.2 against the low armor class and 78 against the higher armor class. This is a 25% bump to our daily average, again, mostly thanks to higher level Summon Dragon casts that are going to be available. Here's all of our numbers at this level. We might be able to boost some of these numbers slightly by making more high-level spell slots, but I'm not really sure that's a realistic thing to do. At this point, our daily average and max output are kind of in the middle of the other builds I've made to this point, other than the Fiend Knight, which that build is way ahead. Again, very powerful, dedicated damage dealer. All right, so it is time to summarize and talk about this build as a whole. So first, what is the overall score of this build? Now we're going to calculate 3 overall scores, one for peak damage per round, one for max output, and one for daily average. The way I get these is I take numbers in our damage reports and average them into one number. So for this character, that is a 76.8 on our peak damage per round. This is actually the best overall on peak damage per round I've made for the 2024 builds. But again, note that this is for an encounter where we have free reign to burn any and all resources that we want, and it's not necessarily reflective of what a real game will be like. Moving on to our max output damage per round, again, and considering the high realistic armor classes only, we are at a 55.1, and this lands right in the middle of the other kind of more caster focus builds I've made. It lands right between the Draconic Trickster and the Maelstrom Walker. And then our daily average, this is for those four round encounters with the short rest in the middle. Again, considering only the high armor class is a 47.5. And this is the worst of all of my 2024 builds, although it's not really that far behind the Draconic Trickster or the Maelstrom Walker, and the worst of a small number is not really necessarily the worst at this point. But that said, this is mainly due to the early levels 6 and 9 not being that weak. This build actually does very well once it gets access to Summon Dragon. And one of the things that you can see here is kind of the decay of this character's damage output and just full casters in general as they run out of resources. You can see that the damage per round when they have a lot of resources is maybe about, in this case, if you look at our ones where we allocated efficiently, it's maybe about 15% higher in the first encounter on average than it was over the course of the whole day. So, as we saw in that first damage report, the things in the latter half of the day tend to be a bit lower on terms of the damage the character outputs because they're out of their best resources. All right, now if I put our daily average damage per round on a graph here, the green line is this build, as you can see, it bounces around a little bit with the red and yellow lines, which are my Maelstrom Walker Sea Druid build and my Draconic Trickster, which is that's a Sorcerer Rogue True Strike build. So it's kind of in the middle of those, which seem to be forming a solid kind of baseline. Although you can see my Fiend Knight build is way above those. I may need to compute an actual kind of baseline that I'm comparing these to, but for now it's kind of cool to see all my 2024 builds since I've started calculating daily average damage per round on a single graph and just kind of see how they perform overall in that area. All right, if I was going to take this character to level 20, I would absolutely go Sorcerer 17. We set this up with our extra level in Warlock. This does delay 9th level spells, namely Wish, although it will give us an epic boon at Sorcerer 16. One of the things I think you might use with Wish, maybe as a culmination of this character's story, if you got to level 20, was just using Wish to become a dragon permanently. I know that's outside the bounds of Wish normally, but that is kind of equivalent to a true polymorph spell, so I think your DM might, allow you to get away with it, and it would be a cool way to kind of close out the campaign and the character's story. All right, one of the things I really like about this character is we have a lot of solid at-will area of effect damage with our green Flame Blade cantrip. Man, I have been caught on that FL sound all day, but that's okay. This character also is overall, very versatile. I never actually accounted for our cleave damage on our cantrip. That's not something you saw in the damage reports, and there's a lot of damage that's being dealt to secondary targets that we're not seeing there, and that does have value, especially in combination with the push into the fire bounce thing that we can potentially do with the Warhammer. We also have a lot of solid control options using concentration or not. We have the whole psychic spell package. We have command. We have slow, fear, hold monster, heightened spell. We have a whole lot of really nice control things. We also have a variety of tools to be effective out of combat, like flight and our familiar, our arcane eye, and all that stuff. And we can potentially be pretty good at our charisma skills as a charisma focused character. One of the other things about this character, our durability is really good. Look at that HP number up there, 175. Now, for some context, that's just as much hit points as a barbarian of level 17 who has a 16 constitution. And we are a full caster. Now, that's if that barbarian doesn't have the tough feat, and a lot of that is because we invested in Constitution, we invested in tough, we invested in Draconic Sorcerer. So we did do some investment to get this amount of hit points, but like my the build that we saw topping our damage charts there, the Fiend Knight, I think has about 50 less hit points than this character does at this level. This character is really durable. We've got plate armor, we've got a shield, we've got a suite of abjuration spells like shield, absorb elements, counterspell, that kind of thing. We've got the potential to get a bunch of temporary hit points with Armor of Agathis. Maybe we're using Blade Ward, maybe we're using Mirror Image. We have advantage on concentration checks. We have great mental saves with Mage Slayer. All of our luck points. We have our inspiration, and maybe a Sphinx to even further boost our saves. So this character is going to be. I think this character should be very, very survivable and very difficult to kill. And even though our damage per round is a little lower, again, we're a sword and shield character, and we've managed to output what I think is pretty darn good damage. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a bard version, as I was kind of talking about this character and bouncing some ideas off some of my friends online. I had a lot of people suggest Valor Bard. Now, the Bard version can do pretty well. It doesn't really have the offensive bonus actions that this character potentially does, thanks to things like, namely Quicken Spell. You would have Searing Smite. You also miss out on innate sorcery, which is giving us advantage pretty much all the time, which is something I thought was really cool. You do get extra attack, which is nice, although honestly, I felt like I didn't actually miss it that much on this character just because of the double cantrips with cantrip scaling and extra damage out of Elemental Affinity is actually, it's a lot of damage. That said, the main reasons I didn't choose Bard on this build is that I don't think that the spell list doesn't really fit the themes I kind of imagined for this character, at least until Magical Secrets comes online at Bard 10. But that, that's at level 12. Your campaign might be over at that point. And so it doesn't really, sing, even though it's a Bard, it doesn't really kind of match what I want out of the character. It doesn't really fit the theme I was going for. So that's kind of the main reason I didn't use Bard on this character, even though having that, almost Blade Singer extra attack would have been a nice thing to potentially boost damage, although again, no advantage out of something like innate sorcery. All right, again, this is a build I think would be very fun and very thematic for the sake of RP. The story this character presents through all their mechanics is something I think should be pretty fun and cohesive throughout, and it shouldn't be too hard to do and justify, at least in my opinion. I think I laid out some pretty good groundwork as an example of ways that we could make this multi-class make sense thematically as we kind of went up in level. All right, so thanks for watching. This has been our Knight of Flame and Scale Sorcerer's Spellsword build. This is a build I would totally play at some point in the future. It scratches kind of my Spellsword itch, and it's kind of not straightforward or immediately obvious to do a Sorcerer with heavy armor and shields. So what did you think of the concept overall? How well do you think I executed kind of, doing something inspired by Dragon Knight, if you know anything about that character? I also want to know, would you have gone Bard on this character? And if you would, is that a kind of a build you'd be interested in seeing me make a version of this character that does that in the future? Additionally, if there's any other builds you'd like to see me cover at any point, just please, let me know in the comments. That'd be something I'd be happy to oblige and cover. Once again, my name is Nathan. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Have a great rest of your day.